If you're a Great Gatsby fan, there's a new book you might want to add to your reading list. Gatsby, written by non-binary author Jeremy Holt, is a reimagining of the iconic F. Scott Fitzgerald novel with a queer and racially diverse spin. We're chatting with Jeremy about their unexpected book and more. This is Advocate Now. Well, Jeremy, you recently released your book, Gatsby, which is a racially diverse and LGBTQ plus reimagining of The Great Gatsby. What inspired you to write this?
I guess for me, it was actually reading the original book. I did not get assigned in high school to read, so it was one of those books, like so many others that were on my to read pile. And in 2017, I decided to actually read it, and I was pleasantly surprised with how relevant it felt, even though it's almost 100 years old. And I was actually working on another project at the time, which was a completely different tone and subject matter, which was involving a serial killer. So like this was a complete shift in that. But I was so enamored with the book that I was immediately inspired. So I actually started writing it as a young adult prose novel first, which took about half a year. And I eventually realized it wasn't very good, but I liked what I had started with it. And it was an early sketch of what would become a graphic novel.
And being that this is a retelling, how much of the piece was derived from the original book versus your own imagination?
A lot of the key plot elements that make the book so memorable, I had to keep because I wanted it to feel very much like the original book. But because I de-aged the characters and I made them, in my opinion, more relatable as teenagers, a lot of those relationships and some of the plot had to change out of necessity. But I wanted to make sure I hit those major milestones. So even though how we get to those milestones, which have not changed from the original to my adaptation, how we get to those various points is very different, which enabled me to put my own spin on the retelling of it.
Over the past decade, we have really seen a massive increase in queer representation in film and TV. But why would you say that queer representation in literature specifically is so important?
I think representation in general is really important. I'm a Korean adoptee, so I was raised by white parents, and for most of my life and most of my writing career, I did view myself as white, and that sort of came to a head in 2017, which was coincidentally when I read Gatsby. And it was at that time in my career that I decided to stop writing white male protagonists. So I wanted to infuse color. And even though Gatsby is a very white narrative, I felt that to explore what the American dream is for people today enabled me to diversify the cast. And so for me, representation is important because when I was a kid, I didn't have any of that. I think Ki Kwan was the only Asian representation I could think of as a kid. And every other character I read in books or saw in TV shows or movies, I had to do this mental gymnastics to relate to the characters, even though I didn't look like them. So I think providing just a diverse cast that look like me, that look like the America that I see around me, is really important for younger generations.
And looking back on your life and your early career, did you always envision that you'd be an author? Was writing an outlet for you at a very young age?
No. How I got into writing sort of was an accident. It was sort of out of a desperation. I went to film school, so I did have a creative sort of background, but I had never considered writing as anything I thought to pursue. And it was in 2008 when I was living in the West Village in Manhattan, and the stock market had crashed, and I was kind of seeing how life was existing around me. I was also very broke. So because I couldn't go out, I decided, well, I'm just going to stay in and try to write these stories I've always wanted to try to write. And what became like a weekly exercise ballooned into like 6 months of an obsession. And then I just took it from there and kept writing.
And as a non-binary person, I mean, was it ever difficult for you, especially growing up and in school, trying to connect with books that had limited queer representation?
Yes and no. I didn't actually come out as non-binary until 2019. So my whole journey with the gender identity was very late in life. So for the representation as far as queerness was something that I gravitated towards as a teenager and a young adult. And it sort of kind of goes hand in hand with what I'm trying to write. I want to write authentically. I want to write stories that, basically, I think a lot of people will lean on the saying, write what you know. But for me, I never really understood how that was helpful because that assumes that what I know is interesting. And I just assumed everything I knew wasn't that interesting. So I unpack that statement, and what I've come to realize, it's more about what you've survived. And I think when you do that, you can't help but write from your perspective, and it's what makes your stories authentic. And for me, it's where I found the most publishing success, because those things that I wove in, the personal trauma, personal conflicts I've had in my own life, those are the things that resonated with editors and readers. And so moving forward, I just want to write authentically and provide proper representation.
Yeah, I love that. What a great point, because that means you're also writing from the heart and you're writing from your own personal experience, and that there is passion and genuineness behind that. And people can feel the energy behind that. But what do you hope now that readers take away from your work, or what's some of the feedback that you've already received? Has it been helpful?
It has been helpful. I think the stories I was writing for the first 7 years, as far as I could tell, wasn't really resonating on the level that I had hoped. And when I started writing characters that represented my own experiences, both from an emotional standpoint and just how the characters looked, um, I've definitely received feedback, which has been really nice, where they feel seen. I did a graphic novel called Made in Korea, which is basically about an adoptee android who is, basically made or born in Korea and gets adopted to the US, which was very much my experience. And it's been nice for that book to have other Korean adoptees come forward and tell me that, they finally felt seen in a comic book, which is really my goal. I think when you, again, provide representation, you build community.
So many books being banned in public schools right now, especially by queer and POC authors. Would you say that it's more important than ever to get stories like these out there?
I think so. Honestly, if I ever have one of my books banned, I will feel like I've won a little bit. To have that kind of notoriety is, I think, a good thing, because, when you're told not to pursue something is usually the things people focus on. So if someone says, don't read this book, I'd like to think that more people want to seek it out. So again, it's providing that representation, providing a community, providing stories that I think people can relate to on a personal level. And I think for me, I just really want anybody who reads my stories to feel seen, just if it's for a brief moment while they're reading.
Well, you're doing incredible work. Thank you, Jeremy, for all that you're doing and for spending some time with us today.
Thanks so much.
I'm Sonia Baghdadi. Thanks for watching and advocating. For more stories and content like this, visit advocate.com and advocatechannel.com. On tomorrow's episode, Queer Cosmos founder Colin Bedell shares his thoughts on astrological dating compatibility. Don't miss it.
I don't think astrology says yes or no, you're compatible. It says how so. That's something else I learned from my mentor. So it's not yes or no, but how so? Because Esther Perel, one of the world's leading couples therapists, says that every relationship is a story. So write well and edit often. And when I'm doing a compatibility assessment, I'm going to tell the story of that relationship and then sort of see where the couple lands within that storytelling and discuss particular things that they can do to edit. Usually too, it's around expectations and entitlements, but that'll be a whole nother three-part series that we're going to do.
But we have so much to talk about.
Oh, of course. The two Geminis, forget it. We will literally be here for a decade and never run out of things to say and never stop having fun. I have never seen the universe not reward people relationally, because the universe is so relational, but it just really does give us that initial kind of space of solitude, of undisturbed development, because other people can tell us to be who we aren't. And so we have to go through this dark night of the soul, this challenging space of solitude and reflection, so that we can ultimately define and declare who we are more astrologically and accurately.